Hello everyone. So I'm going to be discussing the double crucifixion narrative of Jesus. Alright. So in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 23, verse 32, and Matthew chapter 27, verse 38, and Mark chapter 15, verse 27, and in John chapter 19, verse 18, these Gospels narrate that Jesus was crucified with two men. However, what is interesting is, in the book of Acts, we see something different. In Acts chapter 2, verse 36, it mentions, "Therefore let all the house of Israel know assertedly, that God hath made that same Jesus whom ye crucified both Lord and Christ." There's no mentioning here in Acts that Jesus was crucified next to two men specifically, and a penitent thief or an impenitent thief, and one that had faith in him and the other that didn't. So that's quite the interesting part, especially when it comes to reading Josephus. We see from Josephus Flavius, but he also narrates something similar here that is similar between the divide of the Gospels with the book of Acts regarding the crucifixion narrative. So I'm going to first read Antiquities chapter 3 of book 18. Book 18, chapter 3, verse 3 of Antiquities of the Jews. "Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as receive the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ, and when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold, these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct at this day." Okay. Now I'm going to read Life 420 to 421, which is Josephus' autobiography. It's also known as Josephus' Vita. "And when I was sent by Titus Caesar with Cerelius and 1,000 horsemen to a certain village called Thecoia, in order to know whether it were a place fit for a camp, as I came back I saw many captives crucified and remembered 3 of them as my former acquaintance. I was very sorry at this in my mind, and went with tears in my eyes to Titus, and told him of them. So he immediately commanded them to be taken down, and to have the greatest care taken of them, in order to their recovery. Yet 2 of them died under the physician's hands, while the 3rd recovered." So let's think about that for a second. 2 of them died, while the 3rd recovered. It sounds familiar to the swoon hypothesis. The swoon theory states that Jesus survived the crucifixion, and that is the reason why people think that this guy rose again from the dead. If we see in Josephus, because many will say there's no evidence for that, however, Josephus quite clearly shows from his own testimony that the swoon hypothesis is exactly what happened, that this was indeed a swoon. For there was a crucifixion where an unnamed man survived, and 2 of them died. In the Gospels we see 2 thieves with Jesus. The 2 of them die, while Jesus is reported to have resurrected from the dead. This is quite interesting, because we see this thing about 40 years apart, because the crucifixion was supposed to have happened in about AD 30. But the crucifixion with the 2 men in Josephus happens 40 years later in the year AD 70. We see that in Antiquities that the crucifixion under Pilate was in the year AD 30. Now, in many previous videos, I've discussed problems with this idea of a Jesus being crucified in the year 30 AD. The problem with it is that all the other evidence, the majority of the other evidence, suggests that it wasn't Jesus that was crucified in AD 30, or a man called Jesus, but it was somebody else, Judas Iscariot. That's what the Gospel of Barnabas suggests. Irenaeus, whom wrote against heresies, also says that it was, he reported that other people believed that Simon of Cyrene was the one that was crucified, not Jesus. Another thing I'll note here is that in the Gospel of John, specifically in chapter 19, verse 38, it says that later Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, because he feared the Jewish leaders, with Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away. Now that's interesting, because again, we don't see this in AD 30, or the entirety of the AD 30s era. But again, when we look at Josephus, we see him doing something similar, different but similar. In AD 70, as I just read earlier, in Life 124 and 21, he mentions that he went to Titus, begging him to let him take them down. He told him to do so immediately, and he did. If we look at his name in Greek, Josephus' name in Greek is Joseph Huius Matthias. It is very identical to the Joseph of Arimathea in the New Testament. A very similar name, and they both do exactly the same thing. They take down the men from the crucifixion. This indicates that the story of Joseph of Arimathea takes place in the year AD 70. While the original death, the first death, took place in the year 30 AD. Well, I've gone over in previous videos that Josephus does mention a man that has a very similar name to Jesus, especially in the Greek, Bazus, in Antiquities 20, was a king of Adiabene that died in AD 31 during the reign of Pontius Pilate, but of old age, not by crucifixion. And since there are these other texts that suggest that it wasn't Jesus that was crucified but it was instead someone else, this indicates there was a confusion between these names, especially when the compilation of the Gospels took place, indicating that it seems that these names, these people, were actually deliberately conflated with one another. Given the differing accounts, it definitely shows that it's being done on purpose here. And I believe that is exactly what happened, given the overwhelming evidence. Anyways. And there's this work called Quo Vadis. It is a Polish work, and it's a Polish novel, and it's by probably going to pronounce this wrong. It is by Heinrich Sienkiewicz. I probably pronounced his last name way wrong. But anyway, I'm going to read this. It says here, the Apostle Peter was in Rome. According to legend, as he was fleeing from the city to escape martyrdom, St. Peter met Jesus on the Appian Way and asked, Quo vadis Domina, whither goes thou, Master? Jesus replied, to Rome, to be crucified again. I believe that Quo Vadis, the author Quo Vadis, Heinrich, wrote this probably after looking at Josephus, and did a fictionalization of it, imagining Jesus being crucified twice. And I think he noticed the double crucifixion as well. Anyway, Heinrich was born in about 1846 AD and died in 1916 AD. Anyway, his work here in Quo Vadis intrigued me, because of that similarity. But anyhow, considering King Basus, the Jesus whom was not crucified and died in AD 31, Judas the Galilean, whom I believe is this Judas Iscariot that was crucified instead of Jesus in the other text, and I think that what's going on in the testimonium was there's a deliberate conflation being made, and the testimonium Flavianum is Antiquities 1833. I just wanted to mention that for clarification purposes, in case anyone somehow doesn't know about that. Anyway, that aside, I think there was a conflation there between the unnamed man in AD 70 with this individual in 30, especially in the Gospels. And considering that Basus parallels Isus, the Greek name for Jesus, the original Greek name of Jesus, and the unnamed individual in AD 70 that survived the crucifixion because he was spared, and the two thieves that died and with him, or the two rebels that died with him, they were conflated into one individual. However, I do think, in the long run, King Basus is most probably the biblical Jesus. The reason why I say this is because his family was heavily pro-Roman, and the Gospel writers place heavy emphasis and focus on the pro-Roman aspect of Jesus over all other aspects. And that point is stressed throughout the Gospels. This indicates to me that they were trying to focus the narrative on one man, but they were trying to give him the attributes of other men, other stories of other people, and giving him credit, accrediting these stories to him. Which is why I believe that King Basus is the AD 30s Jesus that died during the reign of Pontius Pilate. Because, he did die during the reign of Pontius Pilate, and I do believe it's the same Jesus that died during the reign of Pontius Pilate in the Gospels. But when they were setting up the story, they were doing the combining of narratives, and this deliberate conflation was done. It resulted in this guy receiving attributes and stories of multiple other people, which no doubt resulted in multiple contradictions of his character, including personality, throughout the New Testament, especially considering that in the book of Romans, as well as Matthew, there is this whole thing about Jesus selling swords and selling your clothes to buy swords, I meant to say. That is there. And so in some aspects there are some warmongering by Jesus. But in most times he is a pro-Roman pacifist. He appears to be a pro-Roman pacifist instead, indicating the Gospel writers putting more focus on the pro-Roman Jesus instead of the anti-Roman aspect of Jesus. I would also like to mention that Jesus Barabbas and Jesus Christ, they were both taken up to Pontius Pilate, but one was a rebel and the other was a pacifist, indicating that there was already a distinction being made by the gospel writers in an attempt to separate the anti-Roman Jesus from the pro-Roman Jesus, because they want the pro-Roman Jesus to be the gospel, biblical Jesus, as defined in their terms, while the anti-Roman Jesus can be fully separated into Jesus Barabbas. Of course, they had Jesus Barabbas be the one to be let go, which makes no sense, and then they had the pacifist to be crucified, which makes no sense. They wouldn't crucify the pacifist and let the rebel go. That doesn't make any sense. It should have been the other way around. But that's not what happened. Anyway, that brings this video to an end. I'll be doing more on this later. I definitely have some more information that's going to be coming out soon. That's going to basically continue this episode into a little series. Anyway, so that brings this video to an end. I'll see all you later. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and also comment. And if you have any questions in the comments, I'll get back to you, to all of you, as soon as I can. And I'll answer those questions to the best of my ability. Thank you for watching, and I'll see all you later.